Why do we lie awake at night thinking about a stranger who disappeared 40 years ago in a town we have never visited, in a case that has nothing to do with us? There is something in the human mind that cannot leave a question mark alone. A mystery is an itch, and our brains are built to scratch. Today, my friends, we are going to use that itch to grow your English, because it turns out that discussing a mystery is one of the richest language workouts there is. To talk about an unsolved case well, you have to describe events in the past, speculate about what might have happened, weigh one piece of evidence against another, and disagree with your friend's wild theory without ending the friendship. This is a serious set of skills hiding inside a fun topic. We will build them in 3 stages, from the plain facts of a case all the way up to the elegant art of the theory. And we will do it thoughtfully, because behind every famous mystery are real people. And remembering that is part of doing it well. So let's open the file and welcome to a new episode of English Plus with Danny. All right, let's start with the basics. Every mystery starts with a few key words, so let's gather them. A crime is something illegal. The place it happened is the crime scene. The person who did it is the suspect before we are sure, and the criminal once we are. The person who was hurt is the victim. The person who tries to solve it is the detective. And the small things that help solve it, a footprint, a button, a photo, are clues or evidence. With just these words, you can already say a great deal. You can say, for example, the detective looked at the crime scene, there were no clues, the suspect ran away. So these were some words, but very important words to start with. Now let's move on to some verbs that make a case move. To investigate is to study a crime carefully. To solve is to find the answer. To disappear is to go away and not be seen. To find is to discover something. To catch is to capture the criminal. So let's try to come up with an example using all these words. The police investigated the case for years, but they could not catch the criminal. Well, it's short, it's clear, and already a tiny story. But now, what about some essential grammar for this topic? Let's talk about the past simple, because mysteries almost always happen before now. Now, regular verbs add ed, like he walked home, she disappeared, but many of the most useful crime verbs are irregular, and you simply have to learn them. There's no way around it. For example, see becomes saw, go becomes went, find becomes found, take becomes took, run becomes ran. We say he went out at night. Nobody saw him again. The police found his car, but they never found him. Now notice how the past simple lets you lay out the facts of a case like cards on a table. And now we have a powerful structure to talk about. Well, it is small, but still very powerful. And this one is there was and there were. Now, of course, we use there was for one thing and there were for many. For example, we can say there was a strange noise. There were no witnesses. Well, this is how you set a scene in English. And a good mystery is all about the scene. Now, practice describing a simple one out loud. For example, it was night. There was a light in the window. There were footprints in the snow. There was nobody home. You just built suspense with the most basic grammar in the language. And remember, we're still at the basic level. We still haven't progressed to the next levels, to the intermediate and advanced levels. And you already have a lot of tools to use to talk about mysteries. But now let me share with you a quick speaking tip at this level. Questions. Mysteries run on questions, so master the simplest ones, like what happened, who did it, where was he, why did she leave? Now, these 5 little words, what, who, where, when, why, plus how, are your detective's toolkit. Ask them often. Person who asks good questions sounds curious and intelligent in any language. And the great thing is that good questions are usually short. So, my friends, remember that when you want to talk about mysteries. And of course, by now, you're getting the point that yes, we're using mysteries as a topic, but you can see how transferable all the words and skills we're learning today that you can use to talk about almost anything else. But let's stick to mysteries. That's our topic for today. We don't want to talk about any other thing. Let's continue talking, and we're still at level 1. Mysteries are stories, right? And the very important thing about stories is that they need order. So let's add the little words that put events in sequence. You got words like first, then, next, after that, later, and finally. These arrange your facts neatly in time. And 2 dramatic words earn their place here. Suddenly, for a surprise, and eventually, for something that took a long time. Now watch how they build a tiny tale. Let me share this example with you. First, she left work. Then she went to the store. After that, nobody saw her. Suddenly, her phone went silent. Eventually, the police started looking. With nothing but past simple and these signpost words, you have just told a gripping little mystery. Sequencing words are cheap to learn, and they instantly make your English sound organized instead of jumbled. And now, before we move on to the next level, here's a small phrase that fits this topic perfectly. I wonder. It's the polite, curious way to ask a question to yourself out loud. You can say, I wonder where he went. I wonder who did it. I wonder why she never came back. Notice that after I wonder, the word order goes back to normal statement order, not question order. We say, I wonder where he went, not I wonder where did he go. Now, that little switch trips up a lot of learners, I know, but it's worth getting it right early. I wonder is the perfect mystery phrase because it invites everyone in the room to start thinking with you, which is exactly what a good mystery should do. So, we're done with this level. You can see that we've learned a great deal of words, grammar, expressions, signpost words, etc. And these are important. These are the basics. But we're not done yet. We still have 2 levels to go. Next, we're going to add some color and depth, and we're going to progress to level 2. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Now things get interesting. Because at this level, English gives you the grammar of doubt. And doubt is the heart of every unsolved mystery. We are moving from what happened to what might have happened, and that is a much more thrilling place to live. Now let's meet the modal verbs of speculation. Might, may, could, must, and can't. These let you guess with different levels of confidence. He might have run away means it is possible. She could have known the killer means it's one option among several. He must have had help means you are fairly sure, based on the evidence, but you're not quite sure. She can't have done it alone means you're fairly sure it is impossible. But again, you don't know. Do you feel the spectrum here from a faint possibility to a strong conclusion, all built with little words? Well, my friends, this is the engine of theorizing, and you have just been handed the keys. Now, I have to add something very important here. Remember, if you know, you don't need any of these words. You can simply say, instead of he might have run away, you can say he ran away, because you know. When you know, you don't use any of these modal verbs of speculation. But when you're not sure, even if you're quite sure or pretty sure, but not 100% sure, you can use one of these words, and the range is from maybe to almost sure. All right, we use might, may, could, but then when we know it's almost sure, we use must and can't for impossible, obviously. Now let's move on and let's take it a step further. Now let's pair those models with the perfect form for talking about the past. You do that and you will unlock real fluency. You use might have, could have, must have, can't have, all followed by the past participle of the main verb. Let me give you a couple of examples. The thief must have had used a key. The thief must have had used a key because the door wasn't broken. She can't have left on foot. Her shoes were still by the door. Now, notice the lovely logic baked into the language. You state a guess, then you justify it with evidence using because or a semicolon. Well, this is exactly how a good theory works, and English has a tidy grammatical shape for it. Now let's add to our toolkit and let's add the past continuous and the past perfect, because mysteries are all about the order and overlap of events. The past continuous, was, were, plus ing, describes what was happening when something interrupted it. For example, she was walking home when she saw the car. The past perfect, had plus past participle, describes what happened before another past event. For example, we say, by the time the police arrived, the suspect had already left. Together, these let you arrange the timeline of a case with precision, and in a mystery, the timeline is everything. Who was where and when, and what had already happened before the crucial moment. That's all important. Whether you want to talk about a mystery, or you want to tell people about a mystery, or you want to really understand what happened, you really need to master these. And again, I will have to point out that all these skills are transferable, easily transferable to many other contexts in English. So we're not just talking about mysteries if you think about it. We're learning crucial English skills that we can use in almost anything we want to talk about. But again, let's focus on mysteries. And focusing on mysteries, there's some richer vocabulary. Now, remember, we're level 2, so let's use some richer vocabulary to color our discussions, not just the victim or the detective and stuff. Let's use some juicier words. Let me start with an alibi. An alibi is proof you were somewhere else when the crime took place. So usually, when people have a good alibi, that means they can't be the criminals. A motive is the reason someone might commit a crime. A witness is someone who saw what happened. A suspect, as we said before, has not been proven guilty yet, but we think he or she might have done it. Someone goes missing rather than just disappears, and a case can go cold when there are no new leads. Let me put some of these words together. The main suspect had a solid alibi, so the police looked for someone with a stronger motive. But eventually, the case went cold. Now string those together, and you sound like you actually read the file. And now here's a conversational skill that lives at this level. Agreeing and disagreeing with theories. Well, politely. Remember that. That's very important. Now, when a friend shares a theory, you do not have to either swallow it whole or call them ridiculous. You can say something like, that's a good point, but what about the timing? Or, I see what you mean, though I'm not totally convinced. Or you could say something like, that would explain the clues, actually. Now, these phrases keep the conversation alive and, more importantly, friendly. Discussing a mystery should feel like building something together, not like a fight. And the right phrases set that collaborative tone. So, you see, again, I know I said that many times, and I will say it again and again because that's the whole point of this progressive English series that we're using in our English Plus with Danny. This is a new series, and we're going to have it every day, by the way. Every day we're going to focus on a topic, And of course, we're going to learn the English around this topic, from this topic, but everything we learn applies to so many different contexts in life, like this one. I mean, you would want to disagree with someone politely in a way that they don't get mad and you don't start a fight, but at the same time, you don't have to agree with everything people say. You have the right to disagree, but if you can do it politely, why not? And we can do that. So, my friends, that is a very important skill you need to master, agreeing and disagreeing with people. Now, here, of course, with theories, we're talking about theories here because it is a mystery after all, but in a polite way. And here, a word about doing this responsibly, which is itself a sign of maturity in any language. I have to remind you, my friends, real true crime involves real victims and real grieving families. The most thoughtful fans hold two things at once: genuine fascination with a puzzle, of course, but at the same time, genuine respect for the people involved, their families, who are still grieving. Remember that. In English, that respect shows up in your word choices. The victim is a person, not a plot point. Avoiding gleeful or mocking language is not just polite. It marks you as someone who understands the weight of what you are discussing. The best detectives, real and armchair, never forget that a case is about a life. And you don't want to forget that. All right, with that in mind, let's sharpen your storytelling, because the difference between reciting facts and telling a gripping case is mostly in the delivery. English has wonderful phrases for revealing information dramatically. It turns out that introduces a surprising fact. It turns out the witness had lied. Or let's get another one. As it happens, adds a twist of coincidence. Little did they know foreshadows trouble. And to make matters worse, piles on complication. Now sprinkle these through your account, and a flat summary becomes a story people lean in to hear. Now let me give you an example. The husband seemed innocent. As it happens, he'd taken out a large insurance policy the week before. Little did the investigators know that detail would crack the whole case open. The same facts, but now you are not reporting, you are storytelling. And that is a skill that serves you far beyond true crime. And of course, we're talking about true crime, we're talking about mysteries. You will also need to describe people. Now, since suspects and witnesses are at the heart of any case, build vocabulary for appearance and manner. Someone can be tall, slim, middle-aged, with a distinctive scar, or an unremarkable face that nobody quite remembers. In behavior, a person can act nervously, calmly, suspiciously, or evasively, dodging questions. Notice how the adverb does heavy lifting. We can say he answered evasively. Now that tells us volumes in just 2 words. Now, useful structure is described as. For example, the suspect was described as a tall man in his 40s, acting nervously near the exit. That neutral, careful phrasing, described as, is also a quiet reminder that descriptions are reports, not proven facts, which is exactly the cautious mindset a good mystery discussion needs, especially when we talk about true crime and not something hypothetical or something that comes from stories or movies. So, a lot of points I know we raise at this level, but we're not done. Remember, that was just level 2. We still have level 3 coming up. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Now, at the top level, discussing a mystery becomes a genuine intellectual sport, and the language rises to meet it. You are no longer just guessing. You are constructing arguments, weighing competing theories, and distinguishing between what is known, what is likely, and what is pure speculation. Well, this is where your English starts to sound genuinely sophisticated. First, the vocabulary of evidence and reasoning. Let's start with circumstantial evidence. Now, circumstantial evidence suggests something without proving it directly. A red herring is a misleading clue that points the wrong way. a term we owe to the world of detective fiction itself. To corroborate a story is to support it with more evidence. A discrepancy is a small inconsistency that does not add up. A theory can be plausible, far-fetched, or compelling. And a piece of evidence can be inconclusive, meaning it neither proves nor disproves anything. Now, wield these words and you can dissect a case with real precision. Well, let me give you an example. The witness statement is compelling, but it's largely circumstantial. And there's a discrepancy in the timeline that nobody has been able to corroborate. So this was some advanced vocabulary. Now, let's talk about some advanced grammar of hedged speculation. At this level, you express not just possibility, but degrees of likelihood with elegant control. For example, it stands to reason that he knew the area. The most plausible explanation is that she left voluntarily. One could argue that the evidence points elsewhere. It is not inconceivable that there were two people involved. Notice the careful distance in these phrases. You are advancing an idea while signaling that you know it is a theory, not a fact. This intellectual honesty, claiming exactly as much as the evidence allows and no more, is the mark of a genuinely advanced thinker in any language. Now, here we're learning the tools, but the ideas behind those tools actually matter. Now, let's talk about building and dismantling an argument, because a great mystery discussion is actually a debate. Now, to build, you marshal your evidence. You say, for example, there are 3 reasons I lean toward this theory. First, second, and crucially, etc. To dismantle, you find the weak link. You say things like, the problem with that theory is that it relies entirely on one unreliable witness. That explanation accounts for the timeline, but it completely ignores the physical evidence. The skill here is to attack the idea, never the person. When you say, I think that theory has a hole in it, that's a debate. But if you say that's a stupid idea, well, that's an argument. That's not a debate. The first builds understanding, but the second ends conversations. And I don't think you want to be leaning towards the second choice, right? You want to build a debate, not an argument. And now let's move on to another point. Here's a subtle, advanced point distinguishing your verbs of certainty. Now, there is a real difference between I believe, I suspect, I'm convinced, I'd wager, and it's conceivable. A fluent speaker chooses the one that exactly matches their confidence. Saying I'm convinced he did it, when you mean I have a hunch, overstates your hand and weakens your credibility. The discipline of matching the language to your actual certainty is, frankly, a life skill that extends far beyond true crime, into science, journalism, business, and every honest conversation you will ever have. So always try to match your choice of words with how you actually feel or what you actually want to say. It's very important. When you believe something, say I believe. When you don't have that much belief, you can say I suspect. When you have a lot of evidence and you're persuaded that this is the truth, you can say I'm convinced. But when you're just taking a lucky guess, you could say I'd wager, and so on. Not just in true crime, in anything else. And matching the right words with how you feel or what you believe is what makes you credible in the long run. Now let's talk about this graceful pivot, the move that separates a good discussant from a great one. And this pivot is called changing your mind. At the highest level of fluency, you can say, you know what? You've actually convinced me. I hadn't weighed that detail properly. Or you can say, I'm revising my theory in light of what you just said. And far from being a weakness, the ability to update your view when the evidence shifts is intellectual maturity wearing its best clothes. In English, phrases like on reflection or that does change things and I stand corrected let you do this with grace. A person who can change their mind in good faith is rare, and impressive, by the way, in any language, not just in English. But I just shared a couple of ways you can express that in English. But it's a skill, but it is something honorable to do and something rare these days, very impressive in any language. And now, let's move on to another point. Let's talk about the deepest nuance of all, holding ambiguity. Now, some mysteries are never solved. And the truly fluent response is not to force a neat answer, but to sit comfortably with the unknown. Phrases like, "we may never know," is not a failure of language. It is sometimes the most honest sentence available. There's a kind of wisdom in being able to say, the evidence is genuinely ambiguous, and anyone who claims certainty here is overreaching. Now, of course, our culture craves closure, and resisting that craving, staying honest about what cannot be known, is a quietly advanced act of both thinking and speaking. The best detectives know the most dangerous theory is the one you fall in love with. And you have to remember that. Don't ever fall in love with your theories. Whether they come from just discussing a fictional novel or a true crime or something in business or in science or anything else, don't ever fall in love with your theories. That's the most dangerous theory of all time. All right, my friends, I guess we talked about a lot of things, but there are just a couple of things I want to talk about before we wrap up this episode. And of course, I leave you with your challenges for today. Now, at this level, you also need the vocabulary of media literacy, because most of what we learn about real cases comes filtered through journalism that ranges from careful to shameless. Now, learn to spot sensationalism. That is the exaggeration of a story for clicks. And learn to value corroborated reporting over rumor. And notice the careful legal language responsible outlets use. A suspect is alleged to have done something, not proven. They remain a suspect under the presumption of innocence until convicted. The word allegedly is not journalistic cowardice, it is precision. And using it yourself marks you as a careful thinker. For example, he allegedly confessed claims far less and far more honestly than he confessed. Being able to read a lurid headline and calmly separate the established facts from the speculative framing is a genuinely advanced skill, and it protects you from being manipulated in true crime and in everything else. Now, let's return at the highest level to the ethical heart of this topic, because the most fluent thing you can do is talk about real tragedy with both fascination and grace. The vocabulary that does this centers the human beings rather than the spectacle. You can speak of the victim with dignity, acknowledge the family's grief, and resist the language that turns suffering into entertainment. There is a meaningful difference between the case and what happened to her. And choosing the second, sometimes deliberately, keeps you honest. The truly sophisticated true crime conversation can hold the intellectual thrill of the puzzle in one hand and genuine compassion in the other, never letting go of either. Mastering that balance in your language is in the end mastering something about being a decent human being who happens to find darkness interesting. Now, one more advanced strand is worth weaving in: the vocabulary of how cases actually get solved or reopened, because it has grown richer in our era. A long unsolved case is a cold case, and many are now cracked open by advances in forensics, which is the science of evidence. You will encounter DNA analysis, genetic genealogy that traces relatives through shared DNA, and digital footprints, which is the trail of location data and messages we all now leave behind. To exonerate someone is to clear them, sometimes decades later. And a wrongful conviction is the tragedy of jailing the innocent. And unfortunately, that happens all the time. Now, discussing these with fluency means holding a certain humility. Science has freed people the old certainties had condemned, which is a powerful reminder that confident conclusions in true crime and in life deserve to be held a little more loosely than we usually hold them. Well, my friends, that's everything for today's discussion. But of course, I'm not going to leave you empty handed as usual. Well, I can't say as usual. I just did it yesterday, but fine. It is the usual thing, so I'm going to call it as usual. I'm going to leave you with your challenge. Here's your optional challenge, should you choose to accept it. I want you to pick any mystery you find fascinating. A famous unsolved case, a strange disappearance, or even the small everyday puzzle of who keeps eating your lunch from the office fridge, which is a mystery, of course. And I'm going to present you with 2 challenges. You can tackle one, you can tackle the other, you can tackle them both if you're brave. Let me start with the speaking challenge. Out loud, present the case in 3 parts. First, lay out the known facts using the past simple and past perfect. Second, offer your theory using at least 3 models of speculation. Remember, must have, might have, can't have, etc. And third, name the single weakest point in your own theory, the discrepancy or red herring that keeps it from being airtight. And remember, my friends, a theory you can poke holes in yourself is a theory worth respecting. That was the speaking challenge. If you're interested in the speaking challenge, that's great. If you like writing challenges better, that's my writing challenge for you. I want you to write a short case file of about 200 words. Separate it cleanly into what is known, what is likely, and what is pure speculation, matching your verbs to your certainty in each section. Then end with one honest sentence about what we may never know. If you can hold that ambiguity without forcing a tidy ending, you have mastered something far bigger than a vocabulary list. And of course, my friends, as I said yesterday, I would love to look at all your assignments, but I prioritize my subscribers on Patreon. And again, that doesn't mean that you have to become subscribers. It's totally up to you. And you can send me your assignments. Who knows, I might have time and look at them, but I'm just saying I don't want to disappoint anybody. And with that, we come to the end of today's episode. Another day, we move progressively through English and knowledge together. Another episode of English Plus with Danny. Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you again next time. And remember, as always, never stop learning.